I painted 3 MDF L-shaped buildings. One with big tubes of paint for £1, one with paint from Games Workshop, one with Hobbycraft acrylics. One of those was nearly as good as Citadel for a fraction of the price, and one I had to give up early because it looked so bad. Terrain can vary from small objective markers to painting an entire board, so the amount of paint you need can add up fast. These little pots of paint from Games Workshop aren't cheap, and you don't get much paint for your money either, so can you imagine how many you'll need to paint an entire board? So I wanted to find out if you actually need to use Warhammer Colour when you're painting terrain, or if you can't tell that the buildings have been painted with cheaper paint. I'm going to paint 3 buildings so you can see how the paint behaves and how it looks once it's dry. So, do you need to use paint from Games Workshop when you're painting your terrain, or can you use cheaper paints? First up, Poundland Paint. I bought 3 colours, red, white and black, and they only cost me £3. Can this paint made to paint fire engines and unicorns be used to paint terrain for your gaming boards? It comes out the tube in a similar thickness to Citadel paint, but you can still see the creases in my skin after the paint was applied. I primed the building first. I couldn't buy a grey paint, so I had to mix dark grey with the black and white paints. At this point, I'm surprised how well the paint is going on the building. I can't believe how well it's covering over the primer. I thought this was going to be unusable. I'm slipping the paint on with a large dry brush, because I'll be here all day if I tried to base coat it normally. Then I mixed the second grey. I added more white to the mix to make it lighter than the first. This was painted on areas that would receive the most light, like the top half of the walls and the roof. No more paint was applied to the inside of the building as the roof would cast a shadow over it. I noticed at this stage that the coat wasn't covering as well as the last coat. I wonder if this was worse coverage because there was less black in the mix. Then I started painting the roof with the red paint. The building has a tile pattern that I wanted to paint red to make it stand out. I noticed at this point the coverage was awful. I tried to apply a second coat to see if that would improve the coverage, but it's still rubbish. It's frustrating because reds tend to have a good coverage, tend to be the better paint in most ranges. At this point I gave up painting the building because the coverage was so poor. After 2 coats it still looked bad, and I didn't know how many more coats that it would need. And I know you wouldn't have stuck with it at this point either. Even though you can buy paint at £1 a tube, you shouldn't, because ultimately you do get what you pay for. So before I move on, make sure you look at our free painting guides. Click the link in the description so you've got a painted army to go with your painted terrain. Anyway, on to Games Workshop. I'm going to paint the same building with hobby paint. I'm going to use paint from Warhammer Colour and an oil wash from Knott's Hobbies. I want to find out if you actually need hobby paint when you're painting terrain. I prime the building with the same spray paint as the previous building. Then I start to base coat the building with Mechanicus Standard Grey using the same technique as before. I don't mind if some of the primer is still showing because this will add to the texture of the building, which will make it look less like flat MDF. Then I stippled Dawnstone onto the top half of the walls and the roof. I focused on the areas that will receive the most light while not fully covering the previous layer. This helps build up the texture and add some more variation to the building. Mephiston Red was painted on the roof next. This achieves good coverage with a single coat like I would expect from a red. This shows how a red should behave. I wasn't expecting the Poundland Red to be vibrant after a single coat, but it was unusable over a dark base coat. To add more interest to the building, I applied patches with brown oil wash. I'm using mud oil wash from Knott's Hobbies. I painted a heavy patch, dried my brush on a paper towel, then used it to feather out the edges to smooth out the transition. I couldn't use an acrylic wash for this step because it would create tea staining around the edge of the wash, whereas oil washes create a smooth blend with little effort. I washed the roof normally, but I tried to make the wash heavier in some areas than others. Then I dry brushed Administratum Grey over the whole building to pick out the raised detail and any edges. This was stippled towards the very tops of the walls and the surface that would receive the most light. I wanted to leave some of the Dawnstone from the previous stage. This stage was designed to be a highlight, so it should only be applied to the most prominent edges and areas. I dry brushed over the patches of wash to smooth out any transitions and help the wash blend in with the rest of the wall. I finished the roof with a Zandri Dust dry brush. I used a desaturated colour to give it a dusty look. I was pleased with how this looked for how easy it was to paint. Now it's finished, you can see how the stippling and washes have built up a texture and variation in colour. This made it look less like a flat piece of wood and closer to a stone or concrete wall, with all the bumps and divots you'd expect. Every step was easy because I was using paints made for this style of painting. No mixing or trying to guess how much of each colour I'd used before and not knowing if there was a big difference between the shades of grey. It's easy to look at your shelf or your friendly local store's gaming rack to find the perfect colour triad of grey paint, but you need 3 pots of paint for each stage. So do you need to use your Citadel paints on terrain, or is there a cheaper way? Now, here's the one that shocked me. I used Hobbycraft art acrylics and a black Dana Growney art acrylic, dark brown, bright red, black and white, all in big tubes. Everything came to £11.50. Could the paint from the craft file of Hobbycraft actually compete with Games Workshop? When I went to Hobbycraft, I couldn't find the grade, so I had to mix, the same as I did with the Poundland paint. I noticed this was creating some slight changes in colour on different parts of the building. I liked the effect all the small changes in colour were creating as it looked more realistic. As with the previous 2 buildings, I added more white to the mix to paint everything but the areas that would receive the least amount of light. Then I started to paint the roof. I didn't know what to expect after the Poundland paint, but this paint behaved in a similar manner to Warhammer Colour. In the shop I found this warm chocolate brown. I knew this would be a good paint to test if you can make washes from craft paint. I thinned down the paint to a wash consistency, then painted it in a similar way to the oil wash. I painted patches onto the walls to add some variation in colour and washed the roof with it too. Then I dry brushed everything with a tiny amount of black mixed into the white and stippled it towards the tops of the walls. I dry brushed the red too to give it a dusty, worn look you expect a half-destroyed building to have. The red covered really well in one coat, it looked very vibrant, it was better than I was expecting. The light grey covered well. It did better than the Poundland paints that struggled when more white was added to the mix. So, could you tell the difference between this building and the Games Workshop one? Honestly, they're very close. The main difference is the mixing. Citadel will sell you the perfect shade of grey, but Hobbycraft don't stock 10, so you have to mix it yourself. These paints work out cheaper than Warhammer Colour, and I wasn't expecting it to be this close. If you're looking for new brushes or oil washers to paint your terrain, click the best sellers link in the description to see what painters like you are using. So here are all 3 buildings. Which paint do you actually need? The Poundland building I couldn't finish. The dark grey base coat looked fine, but the moment I tried a different paint it was unusable. The Citadel building is the cleanest. No mixing, no guessing, no problems at any stage. But is this the best way to spend your hobby budget? And the Hobbycraft building honestly looks as good as the Citadel ruin. The red is vibrant, the greys are slightly different but not worse. If anything, the colour variation from mixing looks more like real stone. And the acrylic wash worked better than I expected to. Do you need Warhammer Colour for terrain? Not really, because Hobbycraft will give you a similar result for less and your paint will go a lot further. If you enjoyed this, in the next video I want to find out if you can make terrain from lollipop sticks or coffee stirrers that have gone missing from your local cafe. If you want to know if it works, click here to find out.